Well, a very big good evening to everyone, and welcome to today's debate entitled This House Believes That It is Problematic for Organizations to Aggressively Pursue a Racially Diverse Senior Leadership Team. This is brought to you in partnership by the University of Oxford and YDWC, and we are really excited to have this opportunity to debate this motion with you. We appreciate your time. We are excited to hear what you have to say, and there will be an opportunity for the audience to share their views and reflections later on in the actual event. But up until that moment in time, if you'd be happy to keep yourself on mute, then we'll be really happy to engage with you in that way. Um, Further to that, my name is Horatio. I'll be chairing today's debate and I'll be introducing you to our speakers very shortly. It is my firm pleasure also to have with us today Professor Rhonda Haddy, and we're so excited to have her joining us from New York, where she says it's reasonably sun shining. Well, the sun is shining, and so hopefully the sun shines on this debate too. And of course, YDWC is a social enterprise committed to building diverse and inclusive workplaces. But before we go on to actually start today's debate, I wanted to say a few words. So I myself have never been to an organization or met someone who's a representative from an organization who has said to me that they were anything less than 100% committed to diversity and inclusion. I have never met an organization who have said to me that they were anything less than 100% committed to ensuring that all talent, irrespective of background, could reach the very top of their organization based on merit. But I cannot tell you with full confidence that every company has a boardroom or a senior leadership team that is racially diverse. In fact, achieving senior leadership team diversity has been a real challenge for many firms across many industries. Reports such as the Parker Review have highlighted the lack of diversity in boardrooms in some of the world's most influential firms. And at the end of 2017, there were uh, over 50% of the FTSE 100 companies were all white, 51 to be exact, and they were not all. And of those, we had even more stories from other from other organizations as well beyond the FTSE 100 in law. In many other spaces, we see a replication of some of these similar challenges where actually providing opportunities for people for all backgrounds to reach the very top of their industry has proven very difficult for a wide variety of firms. Well, today, this becomes the focus of our conversation. No one is opposed to greater levels of diversity and inclusion. No one is opposed to making sure that everyone from every walk of life has the opportunity to meet their potential. Where we really do have a conversation is thinking about the how and what we can do specifically to get there. So, before I delve into the wider conversation, it is my real pleasure to hand over to Dr. Rhonda, to Professor Rhonda, sorry, who is going to provide us with a few opening words in terms of the importance of today's debate and give us her reflections on what she would like to hear in today's conversation. So, Professor Rhonda, without any further ado, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be with you all today. It's really such a pleasure, and we are so excited about the partnership with YDWC. I think it's been a long time coming, and I could tell you on behalf of the entire business school that we're so excited about the partnership. And I definitely don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm really excited about this debate, and we'll hang on for as long of it as I can. But I wanted to just say a few words about how we are approaching topics of diversity and inclusion at the business school at Oxford. As you sort of alluded to, Horatio, I think it's a very kind of hot topic these days that's getting a lot of attention. Unfortunately, for some very unfortunate reasons, there's been a lot of media attention, particularly here in the US. But I think it's important to step back and think, okay, well, why is diversity and inclusion such a big deal? Why is it actually important? And as a business school, we sort of think about it in two ways. First, probably the obvious reason is the socially responsible imperative. And it's very much consistent with our business school's mission to address world scale problems of inequality, exclusion, and injustice. But that's really only one small piece of it, because there's also a huge business case for diversity and inclusion. Countless pieces of research have looked at how diverse teams come up with more innovative solutions. It's linked to all sorts of KPIs, very not warm and fuzzy KPIs, but profit, etc. So not to mention that to the extent that you are serving today's society, which is very diverse, ideally you would reflect that diversity internally. So sort of, again, just, it's not just the socially responsible thing to do to focus on diversity and inclusion, but it's the smart thing to do. And we think about that a lot being a business school. And so one other question that comes up is, it sounds very lofty or abstract, diversity and inclusion, sure, that's great. But it becomes important to operationalize that. Just as you were saying, Horatio, very few people would argue that that's not important, or that their organization doesn't care about these things. But how do you actually operationalize that and put those values into practice? And so, the way that we're thinking about it as a business school is sort of in three different buckets or pillars. The first being representation, and you can think about that as who we're actually bringing through our doors. So if you think about activities related to increasing representation of our student body, staff, faculty, partners, etc., it touches upon activities like recruitment, thinking about scholarships, very importantly, retention and promotion, which often gets ignored. And that kind of leads into the second bucket, which is culture, because it's all well and great if you're able to attract diverse talent, but if you don't have a culture that's actually inclusive and in which all people can thrive, then you're just going to have turnover. Those people aren't going to be able to bring their real selves to work, and you're not going to be able to get all the benefits that diversity can actually provide if you have an inclusive environment. And so if we think about the kinds of activities that involves, it involves things like awareness building, speaker seminar series, affinity groups, different types of affinity groups, events, celebrations, and training, all those things that sort of make culture the most inclusive that it can be. And then as a business school, we also think a lot about what we're pumping out. So it's who we bring in, what we foster within our community, but also what we pump out. And ideally, as a business school, we want to train mindful leaders who are aware of their own internal and implicit often biases, and who can foster and leverage diverse teams. And so we do this through kind of a focus on what happens within the classroom, our curriculum design. There's been a lot of talk these days about decolonizing the curriculum and sort of implicit assumptions that have been baked in to curriculums, and things like workshops, and also pumping out research that sort of moves beyond just the case for diversity, but how and what are sort of effective ways to build diverse and inclusive environments. So those are the kind of three buckets that we've been focusing on at the business school at Oxford. And so I thought I'd share that with you. But again, I don't want to take up too much more time. Just want to thank you again. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So thanks again, Horatio.
Thank you so much, Professor Hadi. And on that basis, we are really, really excited to move on to the next segment of today's debate, which is quickly to have an interactive poll. So on the screen in a moment, you are going to see a website called menti.com. We are going to be welcoming all of you to participate in a really quick interactive opportunity. So if you go onto a website called menti.com, entering the code 8371 4102, and we will be entering that into the chat. Again, it is 8371 4102. You will be given the opportunity to participate in the poll which is on the screen at the moment. And the question that we are asking is it problematic for organizations to aggressively pursue a racially diverse senior leadership team. So obviously this will be an opportunity for us to quickly check in with all of you, see where we are right at the beginning of this conversation, and as the debate progresses, we will see if there is any shift later on. So I'm going to allow this to continue to tick away and provide a little bit more context to the debate structure overall as we prepare for the rest of today's event. So we will be having a debate, obviously, which is split between two sides. Three speakers will be in favor of today's motion, who will introduce in a moment. Three speakers who will be on side opposition. Each speaker will be given 5 minutes to make the case for their side. We will go back and forth between the proposition and the opposition before finally coming to a situation where we will open up to the floor and give all of you in the audience the opportunity, whether you are on the live stream or you are here on the direct link, to have your say, and we'll be really interested in any reflections that you have in that space. Once that has happened, we will hand back over to our debaters, who will give us a really quick summary, and then we will come over to you again, i.e. the audience, for a final reflection in terms of where you think we stand in relation to the motion. So as we can see at the screen at the moment, I know only a fraction of you have voted so far. It seems to be the case that yes are in the lead at the moment. And it will be really interesting to see how that changes as time goes on and we get more of you responding. But I'm just going to take it off the screen for the moment so that we can progress towards the next segment. And the only thing that I will flag in addition to that poll is that whilst you're listening to each of the speakers, we would really welcome you to be noting any questions that you have, any comments that you have. We want to ensure that you have the maximal opportunity to engage with this debate when we come to the opportunity for a what we call floor speeches, which are welcomed from you, the audience. So on that basis, you're not going to have to hear from me for much longer. I'm only going to do one final thing, which is to quickly introduce you to the debaters who will be debating in today's conversation. And so on side proposition, we have our first speaker, who will be Amanda Morgan, who is an impact and research lead at Voice 21 and has studied a master's in social policy and research at UCL. On side opposition, our first speaker is Esther Mark, who is a program director and consultant at DebateMate, the charity, on social enterprise. She has a master's in global health and social justice from King's College London. The second speaker that we have on side proposition is Joel Semakula, and he is a barrister at Landmark Chambers and a strong advocate for social mobility. The second speaker that we'll have on side opposition is Kenza Wilkes, and he is the founder of Code Blue Consulting, captain of the 2016 World Championship winning England national debating team. The third speaker on side proposition will be Kiana Williams. She is a creative and social tech entrepreneur at Nullis and future trainee lawyer at Clifford Chance, an international law and globalization graduate at the University of Birmingham. And finally, but not least, Becky Muinde, who is the third opposition speaker in today's debate. She is the Deputy General Counsel at Helios Towers PLC and a jurisprudence graduate from the University of Oxford. So having said and done all of that, it's my real pleasure to call upon our first speaker today from side proposition. May I call upon Amanda to open the case for side proposition.
Thanks, Horatio. Can everyone hear me? We're all good? Fantastic. Let's get going. So in typical debate fashion, let's start by having a look at all of the words in this very long, very wordy motion and try and get a sense of what it is we're actually debating here today. Because we're not here to have a debate about the facts of the matter. We're not here on side proposition to tell you that the sky is red and up is down and down is up, right? We're here to talk to you about some of the issues with going too fast and too hard at this outcome. So a lot of what this debate is going to hinge on is what we mean by aggressively pursue, right? We're not here to say people should do nothing about this obvious problem in our society. We're here to say that we shouldn't aggressively pursue. It's problematic for organizations to aggressively pursue a racially diverse senior leadership team. So what we mean by that is when organizations notice that there's a problem, they notice that their senior leadership team is not diverse, and what they decide to do is go as hard and as fast as they possibly can at that one outcome, paying, as we will argue on proposition, too big a price in the process. And I'm sure opposition will tell you that this price is not too big to pay. We would prefer that organizations did it slower, but they did it better. They may not get there as quickly. We may not have racially diverse senior leadership teams as quickly, but we will have better organizations and ultimately sort of better, more racially just society along the way.
Point information.
So, what are go for it, Kanza.
When you say not as quickly, can you give us an indication on how long the proposition is willing to wait for greater diversity amongst senior leadership?
Yeah, so we're willing to say this is something which is going to take 3 to 5 years. We're willing to say this is something which is going to be difficult and hard. It's not something that we're willing to say that organizations should fix or indeed try to fix within a kind of 1 year time frame. We think that's problematic. So the kinds of policies we're talking about is when organizations choose to hire externally using quotas, for example, rather than nurturing an internal pipeline. They may use other forms of positive discrimination instead of taking the time to reflect on their own corporate culture. They may well ignore or deprioritize any unintended negative consequences of these policies. They may well ignore and deprioritize having a full understanding and posing solutions to underlying issues which are causing a lack of racial diversity at the senior leadership level, whether those issues are with society at large or with their corporate culture more specifically. So let's look at this big price then. What is this big price that we think organizations pay when they go too fast and hard at this one problem? Here they are, right? Two big buckets of issues. So the first bucket is looking at what are the problems that happen when you drop people into a hostile environment. What happens when you recruit, for example, using quotas or other forms of positive discrimination, instead of nurturing your internal pipeline and fixing your broken corporate culture? 3 things here. So firstly, you have people who are pressured to solve the problem of racial diversity on their own. They are parachuted into companies where they are isolated, but they are told that it is part of their role to solve the problem of racial diversity at this company, to solve what may be significant cultural problems at this company. They are forced, for example, to sit on committees, or indeed pressured greatly into sitting into committees, working groups, etc., being role models, being mentors, and so on, instead of just being able to get on with their job. What does that mean? It means that that person is faced with just an incredibly unpleasant working environment, right? It's not a nice place to be, and they're told it's their job to fix it, when they may well not want that job at all, right? Sometimes a banker just wants to be a banker, right? Sometimes a lawyer just wants to be a lawyer. You don't always want to be the person who has to fix racial diversity if you are the racially diverse person in that room. Go for it, Becky.
How is it the case that having somebody who is of a minority ethnicity means that they therefore need to sit on these committees? Surely it is the case that them just being in that organization in that role is in itself fulfilling that. I'm not quite sure where we get to the point that they have to somehow also do all these other things.
Yeah, so I think it's that perception, to be honest, which is part of the problem. I think when companies don't look at themselves and try and decide and try and work out why it is that they're unable to recruit or retain senior leaders, and instead say, well, a quota will fix it, right? We'll just get somebody in and then they're here and that's the problem fixed. It means that you don't get the solutions which you need in order to create a positive working environment for that person, right? That person ends up coming into an organization that may well be racist, may well be full of policies and indeed people who cause problems, and be told that the fact of their existing in the room means the problem is solved, which places incredible pressure on that person. The second issue, and I think this speaks really to what you're saying here, is that the existence of these kinds of policies create obstacles to the kind of changes to corporate culture that we need to see true racial diversity, to see these people not just be parachuted in, but stay and thrive. What are these obstacles? Well, 2 things. Firstly, sort of the hostility and resentment that people who are not ready for these policies have when they come into place. I'm not saying these people are right, I'm just saying they make things very unpleasant for the rest of us. And secondly, the perception, as Becky raised, that the problem is solved by simply having a few token figureheads at the top of the company, and that there's no need to reflect further, no need to take further changes. And so for all those reasons, we think this is too big a price to pay. Companies should stop and think and solve the problem and not just look for a quick fix. Thank you.
Thank you so much for what has been an exceptional start to today's debate. And so on that basis, I just want to remind anyone who is in the audience at the moment, whether you are on the live stream or you're directly in the call itself, we will be having an opportunity for questions and answers after the next few speakers. So once we've had the fourth speech, we will be going back to you. So as you can see on the screen at the moment, once we have followed Kenza's speech, we will be opening up to the audience for any questions and reflections that you may have. So a really big thank you for your time and attention so far. So once again, that was Amanda. And on that basis, we are really happy to turn to our next speaker from side opposition, who will be opening the case for them, Esther Mark.
So Esther and I have had a little switch around. I'm going to be jumping in as the first speaker on the opposition side.
Okay, so I stand corrected as chair, no problem. This happened, and I'm very, very happy for it to happen. So Kenza, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, side proposition can clearly talk the talk. But what we're going to ask them to do in this debate is walk the walk. We think that companies should go beyond claims of commitment to diversity and inclusion and choose aggressive policies to achieve the diversity that they're so happy to espouse. Two arguments in this speech. I'm going to look at firstly why companies have an obligation to aggressively pursue diversity in senior leadership teams, and secondly, why pursuing aggressive policy is the only way to achieve true change. Having heard the proposition's first speech, a number of things to respond to from the speech that we heard. The first is the question of how long we're willing to wait. Because side proposition's primary concern seemed to be the idea that we shouldn't be rushing. We shouldn't be leaping into policies, and instead we should stop and think. We asked them directly, how willing are they to sit and watch, and how long will they wait for? And Amanda seemed to have a bizarrely precise answer to that question of 3 to 5 years that they're willing to wait. Unfortunately, 3 to 5 years is the answer that we've been hearing for the past 40 years. We're told time and time again, your time will come. Don't worry, eventually you will receive what you deserve. I'm still waiting for the 40 acres and a mule that we were promised at the end of slavery. Ultimately, the side proposition's policy of the status quo waiting for change to gradually emerge from corporates is unlikely to be a particularly fruitful policy for them to continue to pursue. In terms of their second concern about giving too much responsibility to individual people, or the sense that people will be foisted into positions that they're unable to fulfill, Esther's going to explain in detail why the backlash that they're concerned about, the tokenism that they claim is going to be a result of affirmative action policies, is unlikely to stand up to significant scrutiny. Before I move into my substantive material, there are two things that's important to clarify about side opposition's position in this debate. The first, that we understand that everyone knows the value of diversity. What we contend on side opposition is that the present approach of broad strokes rather than targeted policy is unlikely to lead to either the scale or the pace of change that we are demanding on side opposition. The second is, and make no mistake, the policies of side proposition are those of the status quo. Non-aggressively pursuing diversity through grand proclamations rather than measurable goals has been attempted by companies for years. Ultimately, lots of people say diversity, but what we're missing is the action to match. And we suggest that action should be taken aggressively on side opposition. What does this action look like? We look to demands like active and explicit recruitment of diverse hires, setting clear and measurable goals, filling them through policies like quotas and affirmative action, actively cultivating diverse talent with the explicit intention to groom them for senior leadership positions. These are the kinds of new strategies that take us beyond the status quo supported by the proposition and towards actually diverse senior leadership teams. Before I move into my first substantive argument, sure.
So, Kenza, could you just explain to us all how the strategy that opposition are bringing before us is any different from a quick token fix, which actually we know by research doesn't actually work, nor does it actually last or stand?
Well, it's absolutely not a short token fix to say that you're going to have specific targets over the level of diversity that you're going to have in your senior leadership team. That takes an actual commitment. What's very easy to do is to say, we've hired a new intern cohort, half of them are Black, and this is a solution to the problem, but do nothing to address the structural issues of retention of your staff, actual promotion throughout your career, support and mentorship, which is the reason why we don't see diverse talent in senior leadership positions. Those are the kinds of active commitments that we support that your side overlooks. On this first argument then about companies having the obligation to aggressively pursue diversity, we on side opposition are going to make a bold claim. We think that policies that act to aggressively pursue greater diversity are part of the obligations that companies hold. It's long been accepted that corporations have obligations that extend beyond their shareholders, but instead also the duties of the broader communities they serve. This is made clear through the ever-growing importance of corporate social responsibility. We think part of that responsibility to community is accurately reflecting the groups of people that they serve, and the only way you can achieve that is by having truly diverse and actively reflecting those that are the people that you are serving. It's far more likely to happen on our side in the world of active policies to ensure diversity than one of broad and vague promises, no thank you, made by the proposition. Beyond this, we recognize the historical discrimination that diverse talent has overwhelmingly faced at the hands of corporate interests, the intentional exclusion of women from the highest level of power, the overlooking of diverse talent. We think there's a restorative obligation to take on aggressive policy rather than the casual, laid-back, change will eventually come policies of side proposition. Finally, quickly on the second argument about why pursuing aggressive policy is the only thing that truly works. Fundamentally, there are structural problems that are not being addressed. 2/3 of FTSE 100 companies have all white executive leaderships. Only 9% of executive positions are currently held by women. We don't think that generic calls to action are likely to work. They don't reach the intended target agents. They do not address the systematic barriers and subconscious opposition to those that are from diverse backgrounds. They fail to overcome the self-selection barriers that mean that Black colleagues are far more likely to suffer from imposter syndrome relative to their white counterparts. For all of these reasons, we believe that affirmative action, explicit mentorship schemes actually give diverse talent a path towards the top. We're so proud for all of these reasons to stand on side opposition.
Thank you so much. Really, really great speech from Kenza. So on that basis, we've heard from the first speaker on side proposition and the first speaker on side opposition. It is my real pleasure to call upon our second speaker from side proposition, Joel Semakula, to open the case that stands in his name. Hear, hear.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I fear that the only thing we're actually going to agree on today is that I probably need to aggressively pursue a better deal from my internet service provider. But just here to continue the case here for the proposition. Now, what we heard there from Amanda was an explanation that it's quite clear to us that these policies don't work to achieve the objectives as set out by Kenza in his opening speech. And I'm going to go on to talk to us a little bit to present two particular arguments. The first being about the wider negative impact that these policies have not only on your organization, but also on society as a whole. And then second, I'm going to address that dreaded M word, the word merit. But before I get there, I'm going to first take us through a little bit of what Kenza has spoken about and why we say it's potentially a problem for the opposition case. The first point Kenza took us to is there is an obligation here to aggressively pursue these policies. On the proposition side, we say, yes, companies have an obligation to promote diverse talent. We say, yes, companies have an obligation to reflect the communities in which they serve and to restore some of the historic injustices. What we say on our side is that the way the opposition attempts to go about doing this actually does much more harm than good. And that's something I'm going to expand upon in my substantive arguments. That what Kenza actually fails to recognize is that these policies can actually be more divisive to the question of diversity and actually more divisive to creating organizations where diverse talent can actually flourish. And then Kenzo went on to say to us, this was the only way actually, in fact, to achieve real change, because these problems actually deal with the structural problems that lead to diverse talent not making it to the top within these organizations. Well, we say no, actually, that's insufficient. The underlying issue here that prevents people from non-white backgrounds from reaching these senior leadership positions in these organizations are often embedded societal problems which put particularly poor and ethnic minorities in continual disadvantage generation after generation. The problem with the aggressive pursuit of policies in this way is that what it does is benefit a very small amount of people, and it comes way too little too late. And we say there are a bunch of other ways actually that this can be done in a much more in a way that's much more likely to achieve the goals sought out here. But let's go on to the negative impact for all minorities. We say that these policies pursued by the opposition defeat the purpose of the mission, that being the equality of opportunity for all within the organization. What they do is that they risk creating negative workplaces for all minorities whose group receives additional support. We all know the kinds of assumptions they create. The effect would be that somebody on the senior leadership team who is a racial minority got to that position, not by their own merit, but simply because they belong to that particular group. There's a real risk that this affects the culture within the organization more widely, whether that's in the form of resentment towards members of the senior leadership team from their fellow members or from the wider organization because of a view that they've been given an advantage or something for free, which others in the same position or who aspire to be in the same position have had to work hard for. And we say this is doubly harmful. It's not only harmful to... Yeah, go ahead, Kenzo.
2/3 of FTSE 100 companies don't have any Black representation at the top of their corporations. Can you just lay out a plan for me for how those companies should change under your worldview?
Sure, Kenzo. So we say historically there has been a problem here, and we accept completely with the opposition case that things need to get better. But we say it's about improving the pipeline from the bottom. We say it's about improving state education and the pipeline that gets to the top universities. We say it's about improving the people who get in so that these companies can foster and develop that talent internally, rather than parachuting in people or allowing these effective positive discrimination policies that we say actually do more harm than good. And we say that these policies are not only harmful to those individuals who benefit from them, but also from those that don't. There are those that within the organization that end up forming a view that they are in those positions despite being less qualified and because of these aggressive policies. These are negative impacts that we say the opposition case fails to take full account of. And that resentment, that internal division, no thank you, Becky, that internal division within the culture will seep into the entire organization. And moving on to my second argument, this M word that we all hate, the importance of meritocracy. It's the proposition case that when it comes to those running our organizations, the highest position should be awarded to those who are the best qualified. Now, rewarding excellence both seems to just to the, no thank you, Becky, individuals in the competition and makes for efficiency. I have a feeling that Becky is going to accuse me there of effectively saying that those that benefit from these policies do not necessarily have the necessary merit to be in.
Would you like to take the point?
Go ahead, Becky.
So just so I'm clear, the reason that 2/3 of FTSE 250 boards are Caucasian is because based on merit, they are the best people. That's what we're saying here.
No, Becky, I say if the issue is one of merit, then that's the point we need to actually be attacking. We need to be dealing and creating policies that deal with discrepancies and actually awarding these roles and these positions to those that are the best qualified. And if that's the issue within your organization, then that's the way you should be focusing your policies. What you shouldn't be doing is trying to create policies and trying to create a system that actually favors other factors beyond merit. Because we know when we get to the top of these organizations, what we're trying to do is to promote the equality of opportunity and reward people according to that individual merit. I guess, well, the proposition's argument is effectively that what the opposition is seeking to do here actually undermines the individual abilities and the merit of those from racially diverse communities. It either creates a perceived or a real risk that something other than merit determines who makes it towards the top. Our point here is simply that diversity, for the sake of having it, provides little benefit to the organization and little benefit to the society as a whole. And what the opposition is trying to do here is not the right way to go about doing this. So in terms of what we've said here today, We've said to you that we agree that that having 2/3 of FTSE 100 boards as being not racially diverse at all is a problem. We agree that companies have an obligation to do something different and to actually promote diverse talent and to improve the situation. But what we disagree is the way in which this needs to be done. And we say the opposition here has failed really to take into account the negative impact that their policies actually lead to, and actually end up doing more harm than good. And for all these reasons, I urge you to propose to support the proposition.
Thank you so much, Joel, for that incredible speech. And on that basis, I'm very, very happy to, in a moment, turn to our next speaker from side opposition, which will be Esther Mark. But just as a quick reminder, to anyone who's in the audience, either via the live stream or in the direct link, in a moment, after we've had an opportunity to hear from Esther, we will be turning to you in order to get any questions or comments you may have. So feel free to raise your hand if you are in the direct chat. Feel free to submit any questions online and we'll be happy to come to you in a moment. So on that basis, it is my real pleasure to introduce our next speaker from side opposition, Esther Mark.
So it seems like we are stuck in the endless cycle of trauma, outrage, and then performative activism. But that doesn't yield any real material change. We saw the latest example with the killing of George Floyd, which was almost a year ago. But what are the material changes that have come to improve the lives of Black people since then? Kenza has told us that we believe aggressively pursuing a racially diverse senior leadership team is a moral imperative. And that is true. Because the importance of senior leaders or people in senior positions are paramount to the way that they can change society. So before I go on to my substantive arguments, I'm just going to give you a bit of rebuttal based on what Amanda and Joel have said. So Amanda said that we shouldn't be looking for hard, fast action. We should rather go for something that's slower and better. And she defined hard and fast action as 3 to 5 years. Kenza has told us that those 3 to 5 years have spanned pretty much 300 to 500 years, especially for Black people in places like America. The funny thing is 3 to 5 years is actually deemed fast action in society on these corporate boards. That is actually deemed fast action by Black senior leaders. Slow action is in 10, 20, 30 years. That is simply unacceptable for the time that we have already been waiting. Amanda said that these companies may ignore having a fuller idea of what's actually going on in their company and why they can't seem to hire Black people or a diverse workforce. And if we aggressively pursue having a racially diverse workforce, we could drop people into a hostile environment. Well, if that environment is hostile, which is basically code for institutionally racist, these are not the people or the organizations that are going to look within themselves to see why they can't seem to have a diverse workforce. People who are racist don't usually think there's anything wrong. They do not think they are racist. So why do we think that is going to happen for companies? This is actually the situations where you need people to come in externally and force change. Second of all, when we say that we are aggressively pursuing this, that does not mean one person. That means sizable quotas with a good amount of people in leadership positions. That is unlikely to make people feel like they are quotas because they are in the midst of people that are racially diverse. That is why quotas don't work. No, thank you, because they only focus on a small amount of people, or more likely they are targets where people can say, well, we tried, it just didn't happen for us this year. We'll try again in the next few years. No, we are looking at something that is tangible, something that we can actually measure. Second, going on to some rebuttal from what Joel was saying. He spoke about how these issues can be best solved. The issues of not having a racially diverse senior leadership team is due to socially issues embedded in society. But what we are failing to realize is that all of these issues are interconnected. It's not just that racism causes unemployment, which causes crime. These things are all a cycle, and it needs to be severed at any point that they can be. So when you don't have people in senior leadership teams, that means you don't have representation. That then means that young Black people will not think that they can be in those positions. It's not always going to be a bottom-top approach. Sometimes you need to go from the top down. Yes, Joel.
Esther, are you really saying that our young Black people can only see role models and people that look like them? That actually proximity to you is the only thing that determines whether someone can have an impact on you?
Absolutely not. You know that's not what we're saying, Joel. But we all know, and it's even scientifically proven with studies, that we are more likely to identify with people that look similarly to us. Let's look at those examples of the children's and the dolls. When the Black doll was constantly called ugly, the Black child felt like she was also ugly. She didn't think that because the white doll was pretty that she was pretty. We know from a very early age that it's monkey see, monkey do. We identify with people that look similar to us and also come from a similar background to us. So we still need that sort of representation. We need to tackle this issue from multiple sides. We can go with a top-down approach, because the thing with a top-down approach is that people who are in senior leadership positions have power. They can then change the companies that they're in. With current quotas and current targets, yes, you may get Black people or Asian people or Latino people, Arab people in a company, but they're most likely going to be in the lower positions, and we know that they do not move up in the ranks. So we need to go in from the top. So moving on to some substantive arguments. No, thank you. This probably won't take long, because I'm going to tackle tokenism, meritocracy, and the idea that quotas or targets are ineffective with one fell swoop, because those ideas come from the same nucleus. So first of all, looking at tokenism. People often say, you know, people of color will feel like tokens if they're put in hostile workplaces. As I said previously, that usually happens when you only have a couple of people in the workplace environment. We are going for aggressive change, which means a sizable amount of people will be inducted into senior leadership positions. Even so, that feeling of feeling like a token is very, very momentary. No, thank you. We do not believe that this should dictate the entire course of the company. Tokens are about symbolic gestures. They're about the way things appear. But we are actually going for radical change that will affect the way things are. That way, the people who are in those leadership positions can tackle the overall condition. Now, let's talk about meritocracy. The best person for the job. I think Becky handled this really well by saying, okay, there are tons of white people in these positions. Does that mean that they are the best for the job? Because that's the logical conclusion of that argument that was being made. Obviously, we know that this is not true. We can see studies in science where there were biases against women by professors, even though the applications for men and women were the exact same, but there were biases just because there were female names on the documents. The same thing with CVs. Even in South Africa, you have a majority Black country that still needs to use targets and quotas to ensure a sizable amount of people on senior leadership teams. That tells you it's not about the best person for the job. It's about racial inequality in society, actively keeping people out. When you see white men in positions of senior leadership, nobody doubts them unless they do something wrong in that role. But when you automatically see Black people, you see women, you see Asian people, and so on, you are already doubted before you come in the door. You're doubted that you have the credentials, even though you would not have been put in that position if you didn't have the credentials. We think it's completely ludicrous that people are basically asserting that people who should be in junior positions who are not qualified would be put in that role just because they are Black. We obviously know there are capable Black people and people of color to do these jobs. Last, talking about how ineffective quotas and targets can be. As I said, these usually only happen in lower positions, junior positions, where people do not rise up in the ranks. People are simply not in the room where it happens. So we need to work on the root cause, definitely. But we can do that in tandem with aggressive pursuit of a diverse senior leadership team. All of those ideas work to entrench racism. It sounds very much like the fear of the Black planet, or the fear of the Black man stealing our white women, or Joe Rogan when he's saying that if we continue with cancel culture, white men won't be allowed to talk, even though in the history of the world, that has never actually happened. These ideas are born of fear. They are born of fear because they are meant to keep people who are not white out of certain industries, and that is completely unacceptable. Yes, all of us on this call here want to pursue diversity, but we need to be radical in the way we need to do it to get those aims. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Esther for those reflections. And on that basis, we are really, really happy to come to the next segment of our debate today, which is the audience participation segment. So if you do have any questions, we warmly welcome you to either enter them into the chat or to go to menti.com, entering the code 83714102. That is 83714102, and that will give you an opportunity to ask your question via our interactive poll. But before then, I can see that we've already had a question and a hands up from what's described as Tara's Life. Tara's Life, would you like to share your reflections? So it may be the case that Tara's Life doesn't want to, but at this moment, I'll kind of read out their reflections. So they had a comment for Joel. Oh, actually, they've just come on. Tara's Life, is that you?
Yes, hi. I just managed to get the audio on.
Brilliant.
The comment was just while I was listening to Joel's piece there, that having it did just kind of bring up in my mind, merit is important, and it kind of reflects what I think is an ideal world, where your merit would mean that you are given the position in a senior leadership role, for example. However, I see it time and time again, who you know does play a big role in whether you get to that position. So I couldn't help but wonder, if we aggressively pursue a racially diverse leadership team, will that address the problem of meritocracy? Will that allow more diverse people to work in these kind of spheres? Or is it in itself also, you might say, a more perverse form of diversity, or a more perverse form of pursuing diversity, in that you're aiming to put one particular type of group in a senior leadership position, and then almost flipping the script on its head? And then I also can't help but think of comments that I've heard from people in senior positions say, oh, as an ethnic minority, you should go for that role. That's what they're looking for at the moment. And whether it was well intentioned or not, I couldn't help but think that just leaves a really bad taste in the back of my mouth, if that's the kind of perspective that non-white, for example, people or anyone has when it comes to hiring in these kind of positions. Then is that the way that I want to come in? And I don't think that tokenism really leaves a good representation for people that do step into these roles, whether they are intentionally curated for diversity or not.
Fantastic point. And I know that it's described as Tara's Life, but could I kindly ask what is your name actually Tara?
My name is Lally. Tara's Life is just a description on the account.
Really, really nice to meet you, and thank you so much for your comments. Okay. Awesome. So on that basis, we have a few more questions which are streaming through. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen so that you can see the comments that we have at the moment. So there is one that has come from an unnamed source at this moment in time. Once again, if anyone has any further comments, do feel free either to raise your hand or to send them via the interactive chat. So this person has said, surely a racially diverse leadership team is ideal, because when you see someone similar to you, there is some commonality, but whether this is possible in a white majority country like the UK is dubious. Really fascinating point. So thank you so much to whoever has shared that. We welcome any further questions. I'm only going to give one more moment. So It's a speak now or forever hold your peace. If you do have any final questions, do feel free either to enter them into the chat or to raise your hand now and we will come to you. Going once, going twice, and gone. So for all of the reflections that we've had so far, thank you so much. We do welcome you to continue to enter comments and suggestions within the context of the sidebar or the interactive chat if you do have any further. But for now, it's with great pleasure that I'm happy to go back into our main debate. So usually what happens in a debate is you have the proposition who open and close the debate, which means that we are going to start with the opposition summary. And on that basis, it is my real pleasure to bring to the floor Becky to close the case for side opposition.
Thanks very much, Horatio. So it's great to be debating this. I want to take this speech to really just look at two main points, right? Because here there are two fundamental things I think that the proposition are trying to tell us here. The first is that the policies that we on the opposition are saying are important, are necessary now, are policies that they say don't solve the problem that we have, right? And the second point is that there is real harm in this approach. And in fact, an approach where we're aggressively pursuing racial diversity in senior leadership somehow is going to do more harm than it can do good. So let's just go through those things, because I think what becomes clear is that these policies are what we have to solve this problem. It's a serious problem. We need to solve it now. And that the harms that are being suggested exist here just don't exist. So the proposition is living in this strange world where the radical change that we on the opposition are calling for is both somehow kind of piddling and not enough. Joel suggested it was too little too late. It's dramatic kind of window dressing that isn't actually dealing with the underlying serious cultural and ingrained societal problems. And yet also it's somehow so extreme that it's ruffling feathers and people are getting cross because people are in jobs that they shouldn't be in. Now, what we've been clear on is that actually, if we all agree that there's this problem, and the proposition are really keen to stand with us and completely agree that there's a serious problem here, but they somehow are of the view that what we're doing here is creating diversity as an end in itself, and we need societal change. Diversity isn't enough. We've been really clear on the opposition that actually there is an element of to be what you see. We need people to be able to look up to senior role models. We've also been clear, and I think this is an important point, the proposition, whilst saying there's a serious problem, have not meaningfully put forward any way that in this 3 to 5 years, we could be where we need to be. If we keep doing what we've been doing, we'll end up in exactly the position we're in. We all want a meritocracy. All we need to do is to look at the government to see that we've effectively got chumocracy. So we need to be really clear about what it is that we want. And we on team opposition are clear about that and know that there are aggressive things that need to be done in order to get there. So then the second point here is this idea that there's real harm in this approach, and that the problem with our approach is that it's bad for organizations, it's bad for society, and it's bad for individuals. Let's be really clear. We on the opposition say, no, these aggressive things aren't bad for any of those groups. It's not bad for individuals because unlike the world that the proposition is suggesting we're in, we're not putting people into organizations so that they can somehow go in there and be the person who's the diversity lead point, be the person who sets up every interning program. In fact, the exact sorts of problems we have are when organizations have a diversity champion who reports into HR and doesn't report to the CEO, when they have a specific internship program, which is just for minority groups. No, we need people in senior positions. And actually what seems to have been missed by the proposition here is that when you have someone who is in genuine leadership, then they have an opportunity to say to a CEO who says, let's bring in this little program, to actually really challenge those on those important areas. And they're not doing it because they're somehow the individual voice for an entire racial group. They're doing it because we on Team Opposition recognize that everybody brings their own unique perspective into a workplace, and that perspective is really valuable. And as has been said throughout this debate, that's why diversity is really great, because just by people being there, they are bringing something that is really important. We say that actually for organizations, this isn't a problem. We've not had any useful or comprehensive idea from the proposition as to how we are somehow in a position where 2/3 of boards are Caucasian, and yet somehow that is not indicative of the fact that there has been some insufficiency in the way we are determining who sits in senior leadership. There's only two options here. Either that we live in a meritocracy and 2/3 of people are Caucasian because they're just better, or there's a serious problem here. So for all those reasons, I really urge you to go with the opposition on this one. We've got a problem that we have a way of solving, and there is no harm in this approach to solve it.
Thank you so much to Becky for those powerful closing reflections from side opposition. And on that basis, it is my real pleasure to call upon the final speaker from side proposition, who will close the case for their side and for the debate as a whole, Kiana.
Thank you very much and good evening. I'll have to start my timer because I don't have enough time to really dissect the unfortunate lies that opposition have just been bouncing around. See, opposition started saying that we want to see us walk the walk and not just talk the talk, but there seems to have been an incredible amount of talking today, because we've actually been told, and I quote, we've been told that tokenism is momentary, but Tara, and forgive me, I didn't catch your name, told us that that's actually not true. And research and statistics show that tokenism is actually problematic and quite long lasting. We've also been told that the current status quo hasn't been working, as if aggressive policies never exist. But the reality is, no, we've seen aggressive policies. We saw it with the Black Square. We see it when something happens in the news and everyone runs to insert something in, and you get email threads and meetings and all of these wonderful diverse things that last for 2 seconds. So we've seen aggressive policy, we have, and it doesn't work. And then we were told,
point of information, Kiana.
No, thank you. We need to see leaders at the top. And it's true, we do need to see leaders at the top. But what we aren't going to do on side proposition is cloth everyone with this rose-tinted spectacle that being a leader, but yet not feeling valued, welcomed, respected, feeling like the work that you've put in doesn't really exist because your fellow comrades around the table tell you that you're not actually supposed to be here, is actually what young people want to see, and everyone else in the workplace wants to see. No, we're all mature enough to be able to read through the gloss, just like when you used to see Ofsted and you get all the good kids to come out and talk so highly about the school, but then you get the bad kids that have been sent away on internal exclusion. You ask them a cheeky question and all the truth comes spilling out. And so what I will say is that, yes, on side proposition, we agree. This debate isn't about whether senior leadership teams should be diverse. We agree. This debate really is about strategy and unpacking that truth and how we actually make that truth a reality. See, quotas don't fix the problem we have. I don't even understand why opposition have the audacity to continue raising that. We've seen that quotas fail. We've seen that they're temporary. If anything is momentary, it is the aggressive policies that opposition have put forward. We see that tokenism doesn't fix the problem we have either. And we agree that these on-trend email threads and little diversity and inclusion schemes also don't fix the problem. And we agree that diversity champions definitely don't fix the problem. But what side opposition are all of a sudden kicking to the side is the reality that what actually happens in aggressive policies when you do have a company, or as you guys all mentioned, 2/3 of FTSE 100 companies are Caucasian. So that means that the majority of the companies also probably Caucasian, is that they get that one black or brown person to represent the entire race. So if opposition want to be honest and actually have an honest debate, then we ought to recognize the truth that the aggressive policies don't work, they haven't worked, and they won't work. You see, this issue is a cancer, and you don't give paracetamol. I'll take you in a second. You don't give paracetamol to solve a cancer. No, paracetamol may ease the aches and the pains, but you have to cut out the problem. And surgery takes a lot longer than popping a paracetamol. Go ahead, Kenza.
So if your team supports neither doing nothing nor the range of different policies that we said we support on side opposition, can you just name specific policies that you guys on proposition are in support of?
Of course, Kenza, you are just right on time, because that is exactly what I was coming to. We're simply saying, look, if you want to meet in the middle and you actually want change, then let's do an audit. We've all worked in the workplace. We know what a financial audit looks like. It takes a long time. It's quite draining, but we get to the crux of what needs to get done. We're saying that it's not that Black people and brown people don't exist. No, middle management exists. There are Black people all around. We exist. So we're saying that we don't just want a cheeky quick fix and get a little quota in and have this sizable number you talk about all flush in for what, about a year, and then leave and the retention rates don't remain. We're saying that we want to do an audit of companies, to look at strategically, as you would do in successful business management strategy audits, what is it about the culture of your organization that's failing? Because then we can solve that, and maybe we can help that pipeline. See, the problem inside opposition is that your suggestions and policies merely chip the glass ceiling, but we want to break it. We want to shatter it, which means it takes a little bit more time. It takes tools that really will actually sift through, and not just a little thing that will chip it away. And we're saying, let's have the company audit. Let's have the middle management team. Let's actually deal with the HR and how we get those senior leaders, because it's correct. It is about who you know. But I don't want to play golf, and I don't ever intend to. So how about we shift the culture so that we don't have to all be buddying on the golf course and have a little signet ring on the side, and then we get to the CEO position? Why don't we shift that internally so that both at the top and at the bottom things change? So it's quite an unfair representation. No, thank you. I'm about to conclude. It's quite an unfair representation to suggest on side proposition we don't want to do anything. We do want to do things. We're just saying that unfortunately we cannot do things really quickly and expect sustainable change. What I struggle to understand, and I'm sure my team agree, is that if we recognize that true sustainable shifts and change require long-term action, why for something like race, which is so important, we continue to have this little genuine fake quick fix that never works? As you said, we've been waiting for decades and centuries. So why don't we actually do the work to make the change, rather than continuing the actual status quo of aggressively shifting things quickly, hoping we can brush it under the rug and letting the wound and the cancer that exists grow? As I said, I don't have all the time to go through all the reasons why you should actually support side proposition. But what I will say is, on our team, we've told you that this debate isn't about the facts about whether diversity should exist or not. We all agree. And praise God that we do. But the reality is that we can't ignore the fact that aggressive change sounds nice and works for a short term, but we need to go deeper. And technically 3 to 5 years isn't actually short. Technically, it's on the shorter end of long-term change, because a short aggressive policy is 90 days or 45, but we won't go into the semantics today. We're saying that, positive discrimination sounds good, but we may have all been the person who just gets picked on the team. For example, a very personal tale, I am Jamaican. I have been picked multiple times on the athletic team, and whilst I can run, it is very different being picked because you made an assumption rather than actually seeing me for my value and what I bring to the table. We said that side opposition don't deal with the hostility that you're dropping individuals into. The sad reality is people will be mean. They will make comments, and we get enough comments already. You see, Esther told us this beautiful thing, which I completely agree about, this cycle of trauma, outrage, and performance activism. And we say side opposition don't realize that that's exactly what they are buying into. That essentially it will be performance activism. Companies will do things aggressively and change things for the short time. But instead, you'll cause trauma for the people like us who get there, and we deserve to be there. But our colleagues continue to remind us that you're only here because of the color of your skin. And Joel told us so wonderfully too, that we have to consider this backlash. And so because of all these things, look, on side proposition, we simply say this. We stand for genuine, sustainable long-term change. We're not here for the do nothing approach. That is nonsensical. But we're also not here for being aggressive and making a quick fix to something that has been a long-term problem. So if you also want leaders who are innovative and want to shift things, and you want to shatter glass ceilings rather than simply chip away at them, then I urge you to support the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Kiana for an incredibly passionate and powerful speech, which brings a much fitting end to what has been an incredible conversation overall. So what we're going to do is we're going to be finished, obviously, in a moment. But just before then, I'm going to refer you to Menti once again, just to have a final vote. And so you'll remember that at the start of the event, we checked what people felt in relation to the motion, and we had most people in favor, i.e., yes, saying yes, that it is problematic for organizations to aggressively pursue a racially diverse senior leadership team. Well, now we are retesting that same question, and we will be really interested to see if there are any changes to your thoughts on the basis of the really interesting arguments that we've had on both sides. So whilst you are voting, I want to take this moment to say a really big thank you to each of the debaters for providing really thought-provoking and powerful speeches. It's really important for us to emphasize that all of the debaters that you see today were not speaking from their own personal views, but were allocated to sides in order to give us the opportunity to really have a strong conversation. And so a really big thank you to all of them for arguing as effectively as they have done. But beyond that, we want to say a really big thank you to the University of Oxford for, again, partnering and making this debate possible. And finally, a really big thank you to all of you in the audience today who have been part of this conversation. Whether you have joined by a direct link or live link, which we know takes a little bit longer to respond to things, we say thank you for your time today, and we hope that you've had a really interesting debate. And so, on that basis, it seems like voting is almost at a draw. We have nobody who is undecided. We're all people who do not sit on the fence, but we have a slight wave towards the yes. And this makes a slight difference from the outset where actually yes had got it by a lot further. So that's where we are for now. We will take things a step further and say a really big thank you to everyone who's attended this event so far. A few things to reflect on as we come to a close. First off, we would ask all who have attended, whether you're on the live stream or on a direct link, to fill out our Future Leader Accelerator survey, which will give us further insights into the landscape for people who are currently in the workforce, thinking about the challenges that you face, the opportunities that you see, and thinking about what we can do to really make sure that diversity and inclusion is at the heart of every firm, specifically where it comes to progression. Secondly, if you aren't already, we welcome you to become a member. Join us at ydwc.org. Thirdly, we've got so many upcoming events, which include the summer retreat. And again, really, really excited to see as many of you there as possible. And finally, feel free to invite us to your organization, and we'd be really, really happy to engage with you, whether that's through conversations, discussions, debates, or anything else. And so on that basis, there is only one final thing, and I'm going to share my screen for you in order to get to the final slide. Just bear with me one moment. Okay, so the final thing that we draw your attention to is that from the 10th to the 11th of July, we will be hosting what we are calling the virtual summer retreat. Now, usually under normal circumstances, we would be sending people onto we would be taking people to, we would be taking groups of professionals to Thetford into a forest, and we usually have a summer retreat where we bring everyone together to experience workshops and many other conversations ranging from social challenges all the way through to career development workshops. This year, the emphasis is going to be a virtual workshop, which is free to all members. And essentially, this is going to be an opportunity to think about how we care for ourselves, care for our communities, and care for our future. And we're going to be facilitating workshops hosted by members, hosted by an array of guest speakers that you can find on our website. And we're really, really excited to welcome all of you to be part of those conversations if you see fit. So on that basis, it's been a really incredible debate. A big thank you once more to all of our debaters who have been part of this process. A really big thank you to all of you who have attended this call, and to anyone who might be watching this on YouTube. We hope that you've learned some really interesting lessons. And one of the final reflections that we'll take from all of this is that we are all on the side of increasing diversity and inclusion. But the real question is, how is it that we do that? Some of us would suggest that more action is needed. Others would suggest that action is needed but needs to be considered. Whichever side you may be on, we really hope that you and your organization continue to reflect on the actions that you can take to advance diversity and inclusion where you are. So have a lovely afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you might be in the world. Thank you so much again for your time.